What if I told you the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one demanding attention, but the silent one in the corner, the one who's been ignored, underestimated, and pushed too far? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung uncovered about the human soul will forever shift how you see empaths. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them both light and shadow, and nowhere is this more potent, more misunderstood, than in the empath. Most people assume empathy equals weakness, but Jung's work revealed a truth far more intricate and far more unsettling. You see, the empath is not merely soft-hearted. They are, in fact, forged from inner fire. According to Jung, the psyche contains many layers, and the persona, our social mask, often hides our most authentic truths. But what happens when someone with profound emotional insight finally sheds that mask? Jung's idea of the shadow self changes everything. Empaths live constantly in what Jung called the tension of opposites, feeling everything with intensity, yet learning to carry it with grace. They witness lies, yet continue believing in people's potential for goodness. This isn't foolishness. It's what Jung called the transcendent function, the rare ability to hold two opposing truths at once. But this right here is where the danger lies, and why narcissists should tremble. Jung said the most powerful people are those who faced their own darkness and emerged whole. For empaths, betrayal and emotional abuse force them into this journey early. They don't just know kindness, they know cruelty. Not as theory, but through lived experience. The narcissist sees only compassion and misjudges it as frailty. But Jung warned, those who lead with heart often have the strongest inner foundations. Not because life has been easy, but because survival demanded it. And then everything shifts. Jung's theory of individuation tells us every person must eventually confront their core self. Most avoid this, but for the empath, betrayed and wounded, this awakening is accelerated. The pain becomes the spark. The rebirth begins. Here's what most miss. Emotional sensitivity isn't fragility. It's advanced perception. Empaths don't just feel, they analyze. They store every experience, every betrayal, every manipulation, not as scars, but as data. And once that data reaches critical mass, you witness what Jung called the emergence of the self, and it's unstoppable. Jung found that true transformation rarely happens in comfort. It arises in crisis. He called this process enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites when pushed too far. The once giving empath becomes discerning. The once forgiving one becomes absolute. This is not a descent into coldness. It's the rise of clarity. It's the moment an empath steps into their own authority. They no longer break under pressure. They set the standard. Here's where the story takes a profound turn. Jung distinguished between being unconsciously reactive and consciously responsive. Most people operate from wounds, lashing out, needing revenge, but the evolved empath chooses response. They've already fought and won the battle within. Jung said the highest victory isn't defeating others. It's defeating the parts of yourself that want to stoop to their level. And this is when the narcissist realizes the gravity of their mistake. Manipulators survive on predictability. They need reactions, explanations, attention. But when an empath reaches what Jung called psychological autonomy, they stop playing. They become immune. They don't chase. They disengage. They don't explain. They understand and then walk away. Jung said the most powerful position is detachment born from insight. Not fear, not retreat, but freedom. The awakened empath doesn't vanish because they're broken. They step back because they finally see the truth. And here's what most people never see coming. Empaths, according to Jung's study of psychological types, often have a dominant feeling function. But this isn't emotional chaos. It's profound emotional intelligence. They read nuance, detect patterns, sense shifts in energy long before others are aware. Now combine that with wisdom earned through suffering, and something remarkable happens. The empath becomes strategic, no longer reacting, no longer bleeding for people who cut them. They've upgraded. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension without crumbling, to witness pain without absorbing it, to respond without revenge. This is the birth of the individuated self, a self no longer dependent on validation, no longer begging to be understood, no longer pouring into empty vessels. They still feel, but now they choose. Their empathy is no longer on autopilot. It's intentional. And here's where it becomes truly soul-shifting. Jung spoke of psychological mirroring. Empaths reflect what others project. But once betrayed too many times, something reverses. They stop reflecting and start revealing. They begin holding up mirrors that narcissists can't escape from. Not through accusation, but through clarity. And clarity, Jung taught, is the most powerful antidote to deception. What follows is something Jung called the return of the repressed. All the boundaries they suppressed, all the strength they denied, it erupts. Not in fury, but in finality. They don't argue. They decide. They don't prove their point. They move on. They don't fix broken dynamics. They remove themselves. This isn't cruelty. It's individuation in action. According to Jung, our shadow holds not just our darkness, but our untapped potential. For empaths, this shadow contains backbone, discernment, and boundaries. Betrayal forces them to claim it, and once they do, they become more compassionate and not less. But they also become fiercely discerning. They know where to pour love and where to preserve it. What emerges now is unstoppable. Jung said the most dangerous individuals are not the loudest, but those who've transformed their wounds into wisdom. The awakened empath has been through hell and came back holy. They recognize manipulation because they've escaped it. They sense gaslighting before it forms. They detect emotional vampires before the first word is spoken. This isn't fear. It's what Jung called hard-earned discernment. And then, everything changes. Jung taught that real, psychological maturity happens when we stop looking outside ourselves for completion and realize we are whole. For the empath, this is liberation. They stop explaining, stop apologizing, stop shrinking. They rise into sovereignty, emotional authority, self-ownership, and what comes next. Jung called it the return to the self, and it is magnificent. True strength, Jung said, isn't numbness. It's sensitivity tempered with wisdom. The awakened empath is a paradox made flesh. They feel deeply, but guard their energy fiercely. They understand fully, but engage selectively. They forgive, but never forget. They embody what Jung called appropriate response. Kind to the kind, firm with the harmful, detached from the chaotic. And here lies the final key, the piece that makes them unshakable. Jung believed the pinnacle of development is when a person no longer needs to be completed, because they've already found wholeness within. The empath doesn't isolate, they integrate. They no longer save people who want to drown. They no longer chase love where there is only absence. They no longer pour into black holes called relationships. They master what Jung called conscious relationship, founded on reciprocity, respect, and resonance. And what is born? The individuated empath, the most powerful presence you'll ever witness. Jung said someone who has faced their inner darkness and emerged whole becomes a force of nature, not violent, but unshakably clear, not vengeful, but completely sovereign. They don't attack, they simply cannot be controlled. They've learned to love themselves with the same depth they once gave away freely. That, Jung believed, is the ultimate fear of the narcissist, the person who has awakened to their worth, integrated their shadow, and no longer plays the game. This is more than healing. This is the hero's journey of the psyche. The empath goes into the underworld of betrayal and comes back as a healer, a teacher, a force of light. Because Jung knew every wound is a seed, every betrayal a doorway, and the empath who walks through it becomes unbreakable.